Hello and welcome, I'm your CodeMonkey. In this lecture we're going to fix the interact selected visual. Okay, so here is the game so far. I can move around as either the host or down here as the client. But when I look at a counter, nope, there's no select visual. There's no select visual down here, nor over here on the host. So let's fix that. Now this is actually super simple. The issue was over here on the player script, we had our instance, but in multiplayer we don't have a single player instance, and it's also not spawned automatically. However, we still have just a single local player, and that is really all we want for the select visual. So let's uncomment this code, and instead of instance, let's rename this to a local instance. So this is going to be the local player. And for assigning it, usually we do it down here on awake. However, when dealing with multiplayer in netcode for game objects, for networked objects, you really don't want to usually use the awake or the start. Instead, there is a similar function that is specific to netcode. That one is called onNetworkSpawn. So over here, public, let's override the void onNetworkSpawn, so this one. Basically, this function is called when this object is spawned on the network. So over here, we can just test if is owner. So that will mean that this is the local player. So if so, then just set local instance set to this. So we do this, and over here on awake, we don't do anything. Okay, so that should pretty much set the local player over here on the local instance. Then let's go over here onto the selected counter visual script. Over here we were listening to the event, and we just do the exact same thing, except now it's called local instance. Then the rest of the code is exactly the same. However, if we do it like this, we're actually going to have the same problem that we saw previously. Again, that is because the player is not going to spawn by default. It is only going to spawn when we press the host button. So if we run this, then this is still going to give a null reference exception. We don't want that. So basically, we need to know when the player spawns. So let's go back into our player script. And up here, let's make a nice static event. So a public static event handler, and let's call it onAnyPlayerSpawned. We're making this static because we want this event to belong to the player class itself and not any specific player. So we have this event, and then down here, when we have the onNetworkSpawn, when this one happens, let's just invoke this event as usual. So this and event args.empty. Okay, so now we have this nice event. Now we can go back into the selected counter visual, and over here, first let's test if it already exists. So if the local instance is not null, if so, then just assign it right away. But if it is null, if so, then let's go into the player and the onAnyPlayerSpawned event, and let's listen to this event. And when this happens, we're just going to run the exact same code. So check if there's any local instance, and if so, listen to the event. However, yet another potential sneaky issue here. This event will fire multiple times for multiple players. So if the first one were the local instance, then we could end up with multiple listeners, which would cause a lot of duplicated logic. So in order to make sure that doesn't happen, let's just duplicate this, and we do unsubscribe, and then we subscribe. This way we make sure that no matter how many times this event is fired, that we're only going to have a single listener. Okay, so that should fix it. However, let's just do one more thing. Like we saw at the end of the single player course, for static events like the one that we just made, those can cause problems when changing scenes. That is why we made this class at the end of the single player course. So since we added a static event on the player, let's also clear it. So we can just copy the function from one of these, so it's just a static function to do that. So let's copy this, let's go into the player, and over here let's paste our reset static data function, and we just set the event to null. Then we just need to go into the reset static data manager, go into the player, and trigger that function. So this will clear up and not cause any problems. Okay, so with this, let's test. So up here, let's make a host, down here make the client. And now on the host, if I move and I approach that, yep, there you go, that counter is now selected. And down here on the client, we can see that one does not show up as selected. And now if down here I select a different counter, yep, there you go, now that one does show up as selected. So the selection logic is fully working, and it is local to the local player. Alright, awesome! Let's just fix one more related thing. Over here on the sound manager, down here we were also listening to the player event when the player picked up something. So we could uncomment this and listen to the local instance. However, now we're going to have more than one player, and we don't want to listen to this event only on this local player. We want to listen it on any of them. So if any player picks up something, we want to play that sound. So as usual, let's make another static event. So back here on the player class, let's make another one, public static event handler, and let's call it on any picked something. So just following the same pattern as usual. And we're going to fire this on the exact same place where we fired the onPicked_something. So let's go down here where we set the kitchen object. So it's on this one. And let's just invoke the event, pass in this, and event args.empty. So over here, instead of listening just on the local instance, let's listen to the onAnyPickedSomething. And that is going to run this function. And again, let's uncomment this code. And over here, we also don't want to play this on the local instance position. We want to play it on the position of the player that actually picked something. So we can just grab the player and grab the player reference from the sender as player. So over here, just use the player transform.position. Okay, so that should do it. Let's test. Okay, so up here's the host, down here's the client. And now if I go ahead and I pick up something, and technically this did work, so we don't have any errors anywhere. But we can't really test that this is working because we haven't yet handled syncing and picking up the objects. So when the host up here picks up something, the client down here doesn't know that actually happened. But we don't have any errors, so the code is all working perfectly. With that, now let's handle synchronizing the object pickup in the next lecture.